Well, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're calling from. This is Dr. Sandra Queter. I'm the Deputy Director of the Office of New Drugs at FDA. And I want to thank you for joining us and welcome you to the continued conversation about CFS and ME. We're happy that we have a large number of participants. We can see on the phone line that people continue to join us, so we look forward to a good discussion. What I'd like to do is before we begin, I'd like you to hear the voices of people who are here from FDA. Unfortunately, there are too many other people on the phone to go through the entire list of call participants, but so that you get to hear a voice in case you hear it again when someone might be answering a question, I'll ask people around me to introduce themselves now. Again, I'm Dr. Sandra Queter.
Janet Norton from the Office of Medical Policy in the Center for Drugs.
Mary Groves, Office of Executive Programs, CEDAR.
Janet Maynard. I'm from the Division of Pulmonary Allergy and Rheumatology Products and New Drugs.
My name is Sarah Eggers, and I'm in CEDAR's Office of Strategic Programs.
I'm Randy Clark, and I'm in CEDAR's Office of Executive Programs.
Teresa Mullen, the Office of Strategic Programs in CEDAR.
Dr. John White from the Safety Staff.
Terry?
And Dr. Terry Michelle in the Division of Pulmonary Allergy and Rheumatology Products.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, folks, for speaking up and letting everyone hear your voice. We thought that probably the best way to proceed today is for us at FDA to share with you where we are in follow-up to the workshop that we sponsored last April 25th and 26th to be specific, as well as to let you know what other fronts we feel like we're making progress on in trying to facilitate drug development for ME/CSF. To keep you from being completely bored out of your mind, we're going to have a couple of people present. The first speaker will be Sarah Eggers, who will talk about the workshop and some of the follow-up to that. Sarah will be followed by Teresa Michelle and Janet Maynard, who will talk about some other activities that we have ongoing. And after they're done speaking, what we'll do is we'll open the questions about, and I'll try to organize the question and answer topics a little bit to specifically follow up on what they've presented, and then we'll move on to other more general questions and in a more open dialogue forum. Someone did suggest that we point out that we are working officially and legally, even though the government is partially shut down. Our operations here related to drug development at FDA are continuing on uninterrupted, and we're delighted about that and delighted that we could be here with you today. So what I'd like to do now is turn it over to Sarah Eggers, who will talk a little bit about what's happening and follow up to the workshop activities. Sarah?
Thank you, Dr. Queter. Again, my name is Sarah Eggers, and you may recognize me if you are at the workshop. I was the facilitator on the first day, the afternoon. And I'm going to first talk about that first afternoon, April 25th, and then I'll give a brief overview of April 26th. The April 25th portion of the workshop was conducted as part of FDA's Patient-Focused Drug Development Initiative, and we gave a big background on that initiative as part of the meeting, but I know that was a while ago, and maybe some of you weren't there, so let me describe a bit about what the Patient-Focused Drug Development Initiative is. It's a commitment that FDA has made under the 5th authorization of the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, or PDUFA 5, and the intent is to more systematically gather patients' perspectives on specific aspects of their condition and available therapies to treat their condition. Patients have a unique ability to contribute to the understanding of this important context of the disease, and this is important to drug development in many ways. including FDA's assessments of the benefits and risks in the drugs that seek marketing approval. So as part of this commitment, FDA is holding at least 20 public meetings over a 5-year period, each focused on a specific disease area. And CFS and ME was the first meeting of its kind, and it really has served as a great model for our program as a whole. We are very happy with how the meeting has turned out. It gave us the opportunity to hear directly from patients, caretakers, and other patient representatives about your experiences with this debilitating condition. Our discussion that first afternoon focused on 2 topics: disease symptoms and daily impacts that matter most to patients, and current approaches to treating CFS and ME. For each topic, a panel of patients and patient representatives shared comments to begin the dialogue, and this was followed by a facilitated discussion with all patients and patient representatives in the audience. Participants who joined by the webcast were also able to add comments, and everyone, patients and others, were encouraged to submit comments on the topic to a public docket. And that is that anyone could go to a specific page on the regulations.gov website and send us a statement. The docket was open from March 11th, when we announced the April meeting, until it was closed on August 2. On September 18, September 19, I believe, we posted our summary report of that meeting to the Patient-Focused Drug Development website, and that information can be found on the link that was in your Eventbrite invitation. The report incorporates the input from the in-person and webcast meeting participants, as well as the comments submitted to the docket. It's organized around those 2 main topics: first, the symptoms that matter most and the impact they have on daily life, and second, the range of treatments currently used to treat CFS and ME. Our goal was to faithfully recount patients' voices, using your own words as much as possible, and really reflecting your perspectives in a way that is most helpful to FDA. The input that we got and reported in our report underscores the chronic and debilitating nature of CFS and ME, which can severely affect a patient's day-to-day functioning and have a devastating impact on a patient's life and the lives of their families. The variability in current approaches to treatments is striking. Patients have tried a wide range of drug and non-drug therapies with varying effectiveness, and for some, none are effective. FDA will carefully consider this input as we fulfill our role in the drug development process, such as when advising sponsors on drug development programs and assessing products under review for marketing approval. We also believe that this input may add value to drug development more broadly. For example, as drug developers explore potential areas of unmet need for CFS and ME patients, or point to the potential need for development and qualification of new outcome measures, such as those related to cognitive functioning in clinical trials. We have received very positive feedback from our FDA colleagues on the value of this report. We have also received appreciation and positive and constructive feedback from the patient community, and that's really important to us. We're delighted to hear that many of you felt that the report was thorough and fair in its depiction. Many of you contributed in some way to our effort. Approximately 150 people attended the meeting in person, 300 on the web, and 220 comments were submitted to the public docket. The success of this first meeting is really in large part to the tremendous participation and feedback from patients, caregivers, and advocates who contributed to the meeting. We have learned a lot from the first meeting and the subsequent meetings which we've held for HIV, for lung cancer, and for narcolepsy, and we strive to keep improving along the way. We understand the effort and courage required for your contribution. On behalf of my colleagues, we really want to extend our sincere gratitude. That's the first day. We have gratitude and appreciation for the second day too, but really it's a shout out for the participation in that first afternoon. And now I'm going to switch gears and talk about a little bit of the second day, April 26th. The second day was more of a technical discussion, broadening the dialogue to include healthcare professionals, academics, researchers, pharmaceutical manufacturer representatives, and FDA staff. Its goal is to shine light on some common and fundamental issues in drug development for CFS and ME, and gather information that's currently most valuable in helping FDA foster our role in drug development.
So this was, let me just kind of jump in here, Sarah. So the first day was really trying to capture the clinical status of what the condition is. You know, who are the people who have this condition? What is it that they're experiencing? And so day 2 was to broaden the discussion to include people who may be in a position to help get drugs developed and think about how to study them. Is that a good way to put it?
Exactly. We had valuable contributions from clinical researchers, clinicians, patients, industry representatives, and our own colleagues. The key topics included drug innovation and drug repurposing, regulatory pathways to facilitate drug development, considerations on endpoint development and qualification, and current issues, challenges, and opportunities in conducting clinical research. Many of the points raised were really sharp and provocative. For example, the talk by Bernard Munoz from Innocent, who spoke on de-risking drug discovery, and the entire closing panel discussion on the path forward. Like day 1, we have received very positive feedback on the workshop from the speakers and panelists, from participants, and from the patient community. We plan to create a summary report capturing the day 2 input, but given the current appropriation situation, we don't yet have an established target date for that. In a few minutes, my colleague Janet and Teresa will describe other efforts directly building off this workshop.
Okay, so should we go on to that? One option would be to take some questions now. If you have questions for Sarah, rather than opening up the phone lines right now for that, write your question down, and we'll have an opportunity to, when we go to the open forum part of this conference call, you can then say this was a question for Sarah to follow up. I'd like to step in now and introduce Dr. Terry Michelle, who many of you know. She's been the FDA representative to the CFS and has been an active participant in all of our activities related to CFS and ME for a number of years now. And she is here with Dr. Janet Maynard, who is another medical officer in our center, and I'm going to turn it over to Terry.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Cleater. So first off, let me welcome everyone to the teleconference again on behalf of the division. So I've had the privilege of serving on the CFS now since FDA made their decision back in January of 2011 to consolidate all of the chronic fatigue syndrome applications in the Division of Pulmonary Allergy and Rheumatology Products. And the genesis of that was to provide one-stop shopping for sponsors coming in with chronic fatigue syndrome applications. And also for us to try to have an impact on drug development in this arena. And so as a member of the CFSAC, I've really been privileged to get to meet many of you. And at this point in time, I am moving on to another position within the agency, and I've been transitioning my role to Dr. Janet Maynard. So I'm very delighted to be able to introduce Dr. Maynard to you. Janet is a rheumatologist in the Division of Pulmonary Allergy and Rheumatology Products. She's a clinical team leader, and beginning with the November meeting, will be coming to the CFSAC meetings and serving as the ex officio member. Janet has worked with me extensively over the last 2 years, and many of you will recognize her from her work on several different applications related to chronic fatigue syndrome. So she has, while she has perhaps not been in the limelight, she has been very much involved in this and will be telling you about her efforts along the lines of guidance and how she is spearheading that process for the FDA. So at this point, I'll turn the mic over to Dr. Maynard and let her tell you about some of the other exciting things that FDA is doing in the arena of drug development.
Great. Thank you so much, Terry. So as Terry mentioned, my name is Janet Maynard, and I'm an acting clinical team leader in CDER's Division of Pulmonary Allergy and Rheumatology Products, which we fondly refer to as DPARP at FDA. So as Terry mentioned, my medical training is in internal medicine and rheumatology. And I just really wanted to emphasize that I am very appreciative of the opportunity to work on issues related to CFS and ME as part of my activities at the FDA. So first, I recognize that there are currently no approved therapies indicated to treat CFS and ME, and this represents a significant public health concern. So there are 4 primary topics that I'm hoping to cover this afternoon in the context of current projects related to drug development in CFS, ME, and potential methods to catalyze drug development. These topics include recognition of the lack of approved therapies for CFS and ME, how FDA can assist with this issue, a description of drug development guidances, and what is being done right now at FDA to help catalyze CFS and ME drug development. There will be an opportunity, as Dr. Cleater mentioned, for questions and discussions after I have discussed these topics. So first, FDA recognizes that there are currently no approved therapies indicated to treat CFS and ME. The lack of approved therapies indicated for the treatment of CFS and ME represents a public health concern. We are committed to finding avenues to collaborate with interested parties to foster development of viable treatment options for serious diseases such as CFS and ME. Second, FDA plays a role in drug development by working with pharmaceutical companies and other interested parties to assure clinical development programs meet their defined objectives. These objectives generally involve approval of a drug for the treatment of a disease. One tool that FDA uses to help pharmaceutical companies and other interested parties to develop drugs is the guidance document. The third topic I would like to cover is what is a guidance and how is it used. Guidance documents represent FDA's current thinking on a particular subject. These documents are intended to provide guidance to different individuals depending on the context of their use. In the context of drug development, a guidance is intended to assist the pharmaceutical industry in the development of drug products for the treatment of a specific disease or type of diseases. Guidance documents include information to help pharmaceutical companies plan, design, and perform clinical studies and perform data analyses. While guidance documents help pharmaceutical industry develop products, they are not roadmaps. Rather, pharmaceutical companies are encouraged to discuss development plans with the FDA before starting studies to ensure that the clinical study design and analysis plan meet defined objectives. Drug development depends on many factors, including whether the drug is being developed for the whole populations of patients with a specific disease or a subset of patients. These factors are important to consider during the drug development process, and FDA works with companies to individualize the process. The fourth topic I would like to cover is what FDA is doing to catalyze CFS and ME drug development. Guidance documents represent one way that the FDA can help catalyze CFS and ME drug development. The FDA has recently published a draft guidance and is working on another guidance that will help catalyze drug development for CFS and ME. The recently published draft guidance is for serious conditions such as CFS and ME. This draft guidance for industry involves expedited programs for serious conditions. The guidance outlines expedited programs available for qualifying products, including fast track designation, breakthrough therapy designation, accelerated approval, and priority review. In addition, based on the results of a public workshop held on April 25th and 26th, 2013, FDA is working on a guidance for industry specifically for CFS and ME drugs. Although still in development with FDA, this document will provide advice to the pharmaceutical industry in order to expedite research on the development of medications for CFS and ME patients. Importantly, there points in the guidance process where there will be the opportunity for public comment, and we would greatly appreciate the contributions of interested parties in those settings. Consistent with FDA's guidance practices, a public notification will be announced in the Federal Register when the guidance has been released. We encourage you to consider submitting comments to the public docket when it becomes available. When the guidance is initially released to the public, it will be in draft form. Regardless of whether it is draft or final, it will provide important information to companies and investigators trying to develop drugs for CFS and ME. In summary, FDA recognizes that there are no currently approved therapies indicated to treat CFS and ME. We are committed to finding avenues to collaborate with interested parties to foster development of viable treatment options for serious diseases such as CFS and ME. Currently, we are focusing our efforts on writing a guidance on drug development for CFS and ME as one method to catalyze drug development. While a guidance may catalyze drug development, a guidance is not necessary to allow drug development in CFS and ME. FDA is extremely supportive of efforts to develop safe and effective treatments for these debilitating conditions and is open to dialogue with the scientific, patient, and pharmaceutical communities. These discussions with companies and investigators are ongoing and are being encouraged. And with that, I'd like to end my remarks and hand it back over to Dr. Peter.
Okay. Great. Anything from folks in the room, anything that Sarah or Janet left out that you wanted to highlight? All right. Well, I'd like to open up for questions from everyone else on the phone who's not sitting here at FDA. I'd like to try and facilitate this a little bit. I'd like us to start with any questions that you might have for Sarah Eggers, particularly surrounding the workshop and the posted summary of the workshop about day one. If you have questions for Sarah, why don't you plan to indicate so by getting online now, and the operator will just kind of call on people in turn.
If you do have a question for Sarah, please press star then 1, and to withdraw your question, press star then 2. Stand by for your first question, please. Our first question comes from Billy Moore. Your line is open.
Thank you very much. We want to thank Dr. Mullen's group for doing such a good job with the Voice of the Patient report. Just another compliment to you for capturing so well what was so moving in that meeting. In spite of that, we were disappointed that the FDA had heard testimony for more than a decade at CFS and failed to act upon it. What I am hearing today, particularly from Janet, is that you are acting upon it, and this is very encouraging. What we need now is exactly what you're describing, plus possibly another stakeholders meeting, to bring in the pharmaceutical companies who have already got drugs that are being used off-label by the leading doctors and the leading clinicians to treat these drugs, to treat the patients. However, the patients who are going to these doctors are a very, very minuscule number compared to the number suffering, because they can't get to the doctors. We don't have a nationwide network of thousands and thousands of doctors who can treat this. We need to have a drug that is widely accepted by the medical community and that many doctors can use a few. And therefore, the people who are already producing these drugs are antivirals, Ampligen, rituximab, and others. These companies need to be brought to the table. You need to seek them out, and the patient community will be more than happy to help you with that. And once again, thank you very much for this.
Well, thank you for those comments. And I'll take them as comments and appreciate them. But I didn't see them as questions.
I did have one question.
Yes.
What is your timeline for the draft that Janet mentioned?
Janet, you want to go ahead?
Unfortunately, guidance is usually a long process because we get input throughout FDA, but we understand the importance of this document to hopefully catalyze drug development in CFS and ME. So our hope is to have a draft guidance available for the public in the spring of 2014.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Billy. Okay, next question, operator.
Our next question comes from Dr. Derek Englander. Your line is open.
Good afternoon. Congratulations to Dr. Janet Maynard on her new position. I'm particularly interested in looking at rituximab, as previously been mentioned. The Mello's work in Norway is creating quite a lot of interest, both on this side of the Atlantic and the other. How do we actually contact Janet to submit some ideas of plans to do this research? Could you tell me, actually, do we contact Dr. Maynard by letter or by email or by both? Thanks, and congratulations again.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And just to make sure I understand your question would be how to sort of work with the FDA about potentially bringing Rituxan as something that could be developed as a drug for the treatment of CFS, correct?
Correct. How do we actually submit a proposal for looking at this drug under clinical conditions?
So there are guidelines available on FDA's website regarding sort of how you would submit information and that sort. And I don't know if we have a link right now on the CFS webpage that sort of gives sort of those other links that have helpful information, but that might be something
we can do that. That's something we can put up.
Yeah, because that's a really, I want to say we really appreciate that as a suggestion, because the process would be to submit what's called an IND. And there are actually official guidances and other documents available through FDA's website that outline exactly the steps in that process. But I don't think we currently have a link from the CFS webpage to those other pages. But I'm looking at Randy. I think we can add that to the CFS webpage so that you can have it. Yeah, and there's a lot of information available. It's just sometimes hard to see where it is, exactly how to find it can be confusing. So we'll add that link to the CFS homepage, and we really appreciate that suggestion. That's very helpful.
And actually, Dr. Lynch, I guess one question I think there's two ways to think about it. One is, if you and another group of investigators wanted to do this on your own, you could submit your own IND using marketed rituximab. Alternatively, you could work through the company that manufactures the drug and get them to be the sponsor of the application to us, and potentially even supply the drug. And you know, as always, these clinical investigations always come down to getting some funding, and that. But those are two ways you can do it. And some of the information that we have on the page we'll provide a link to. Will give you some hints about how to think about that.
What is the website page that one would actually go towards a fast track on rituximab?
We're talking, sorry, so currently FDA has a CFS webpage that has helpful information regarding CFS. So what I thought might be good is to add a link on that specific page to other information about how to submit an IND, just so it's easily accessible.
And this is Brandy Clark. What I can do as a follow-up to this call, once I pull the links that Janet recommends, what I'll do is I'll add them to the webpage, and then I'll send an email out to everyone that participated in this call, in addition to everyone that was involved in the April public meeting. And that way you have all the links together. It will be under the main CFS webpage if you're already familiar with that. We've been trying to keep it up to date. We've recently made some changes to it to kind of streamline it, but that way you just have it as a reminder if you're not as familiar with the webpage.
So it sounds like you will receive the link, and then hopefully it will get very clear. And if there's any questions, of course, we're always willing to take any questions that come up. So we really appreciate that idea.
Thank you.
And our next question in queue comes from Gannett Burmeister. Your line is open.
Yes, hi. My question is for Dr. Maynard. I was wondering if you could give us an update in terms of what kind of drug applications are currently in front of the FDA for this disease, how many, what types of drugs, and specifically if you could let us know if it's true that there's an application for combination drugs currently pending, which would be a combination of two already FDA-approved drugs, FDA-approved not for this disease but for other diseases, specifically antidepressants. So the combination of a couple of antidepressants, if that is something that you're looking at right now. And you probably can't say, but I'm going to ask anyway, if you could let us know who the application is from.
That is a great question, and I think you already sort of realize that unfortunately there are limitations on the information that we can disclose. So we cannot disclose when a sponsor comes to speak with us about developing products for any condition. The sponsors can disclose that information, but FDA unfortunately is not at liberty to give the information about exactly which products are being developed or the exact number of products. So I think
last year at the call, we were being told that I believe it was 9 drugs had applications pending, and we were told they were all supplements in addition, or besides Ampligen. So you can't give us that information this year?
No, unfortunately.
This is Dr. Michelle. I'm going to jump in here. Where that information came from, that was a specific question that the CFS posed to FDA, was to ask us what were the number of applications for products in development for chronic fatigue syndrome, and specifically the number of INDs. Exactly. So INDs are investigational new drug applications. That does not mean that the products have gone through review and been ready for marketing, or even that they've done clinical trials. It's just that somebody wanted to do a clinical trial in them. So based on
INDs currently for this year, or is that something that's off the table right now to discuss as well?
So let me go there. So we, after much hoop jumping exercises, got special permission to look at that information, and we will request that permission again, and perhaps Janet can give an update at the CFS meeting in November. We will not be able to tell you anything specific about the application, but we will try to give you a number.
If you could just give us the type of information you gave us last year, which was the number, and it was basically only just supplements, that would be very helpful. Or if it's not just supplements, if you can't say what it is, but that it is something other than supplements, that I think people will find that very helpful. But I appreciate your position right now. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Terry, for that additional information. So we'll go to the next question, I think.
And our next question comes from Giselle Morales Barreto. Your line is open.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Gisela Morales Barreto, and I'm calling as a caregiver. And my question is, probably touching on, I was there in April, and it's touching on the information that I received there, and thinking about all of this process, in the last few months, and reading what you all, submitted as the summary of the conference, that, again, it was wonderful. The experience in person, and then reading the material as I think the first caller said, you did capture a lot of what happened there. It was amazing. But I wanted to ask again, one of the questions that I asked there when I was there, and it's my view of all of this, as a caregiver and reading about this, is that they are, definitely, physicians, researchers working on this. But I get the feeling that the information, or what I perceive, is that the information that everybody's working on is not shared, all the way through. And I think that is, number one, a fact that affects the pharmaceutical companies also coming to investigate this and creating products, because everybody's working from a different angle, if you know what I mean. And how, and I don't know if it's the CDC or NIH, how can really that information be shared in a way that attracts, again, the pharmaceutical companies to really look into this? Because as you have repeated, this afternoon, and we know there are no products, no medications approved, and there's a desperate need, for that. And I think of the silos, and how do we bring those silos down so that the information is shared in a way that, again, as I said earlier, attracts people to investigate this more, research it more, and come up with something that is going to relieve not probably everybody, but at least the process, to start. Thank you.
I'll take that. This is Dr. Queter. I don't think that there's one answer to your question. And I really appreciate your perspective that there seem to be a large number of people who are interested in this condition, and particularly interested in developing treatments that will improve the lives of patients. Yet there doesn't seem to be a place where they can where all that information can converge. Some of that comes through, the traditional way that this occurs in other areas of medicine is publication of articles in the medical literature. Though that is a very, very powerful way of bringing, I would call it, for lack of a better term, sort of mainstream attention to a disease and the challenge of therapies. And so that's kind of a tried and true mechanism. I think one of the challenges that we have in this field is that a lot of the folks who are spending time trying to do the research, they're also very busy clinicians, and they don't have a lot of time to be writing up articles to be published in journals. It's just for anybody who's ever tried to do it, it's extremely time consuming. And most people, I think it has, for investigators and researchers, it has a little bit of an amnesia effect, because when you're doing it, you promise yourself you'll never do this again. And then you do it again because you have to, but maybe you forgot how painful it was. But that's one way. Another is if there is a study group in a particular institution that seems to be able to attract investigators to share their experiences and develop a path forward. Another way is sometimes, and this is where we come in, Dr. Maynard talked about developing a guidance document. The existence of a guidance document itself doesn't mean that companies will all of a sudden, take those helpful hints and go about the business of developing products to treat a particular disease. But what it does do is it does give them a sense of what the expectations are should they currently manufacture a drug that is being used off-label, or that someone has contemplated might actually be helpful in this disease. Because what companies always want to know is they want to know, what are the rules? What would I have to do to get a drug developed, to test a drug, to study it in this population? What is the general expectation? And we often see, once a guidance document is published, a couple of months later, after companies and investigators have had a chance to digest it a little bit, they start to come to FDA and go out to the community and have more conversations. So all three of those ways, there's no one way that you bring people together, but all three of those are ways to catalyze development of medical products. And, we're trying to pay attention to all three, and we hope that, through your efforts, you are as well. So thank you for that comment.
Can I have a quick follow-up on what you said? And I thank you for your answer. But, I'm always looking at the big picture, Dr. Kruger. And one thing that surprises me every single day is that this, illness has been around for a long, long time. And the patient community is, desperate, as you can imagine, and you saw it in April, the people who attended. And I, I live in Massachusetts, and I see, believe it or not, more and more cases every day of this. And I say more and more because right now I'm surrounded by 3, and I'm looking at this and I'm saying, so what is going on here that the medical community is not really engaging into this process more to understand this illness, better. And I don't know if you have any advice or any comment, to where, for instance, the efforts of the patient community or the caregivers should be focusing more right now, to try to push this more quickly after 6 years of.
Well, my advice is to take it back to the medical community. And I think that's one of the most important things that people who are taking care of patients with this and who are frustrated can do, is take it to your medical community. Take it to the medical society to think about these things, to try to develop guidelines and generate that kind of enthusiasm, because ultimately as well, anyone who wants to study the drugs is going to have to go back to the medical community in order to help them do that. It's really, the energy has to come from a variety of places, and the medical community is an important one. And it's people like yourself who are in the medical community who can do that better than anyone else.
Okay, thank you very much.
Our next question comes from Scott Shortenhouse. Your line is open.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate all the work that the FDA is doing around this. It's very exciting. I am with industry and with Eli Lilly, and I just had a question, a policy-related question about how exactly the FDA is going to kind of findings into action in a very systematic way, so that when reviewers are looking at this, or the division is looking at this, that they'll be able to kind of understand, what happened at the meeting, the survey that was accompanying with it, and then the report. I'm just wondering how will the division kind of implement the findings of this, and how will that occur? Thank you.
I'm going to clarify just for a second. Thank you, Scott. When you say the division, you mean the review division, DPARC, the division that Janet Maynard is from and that Michelle came from. So your concern is how, all of this experience will ultimately reach those folks to take it all into account as they're thinking about drug development in this disease. Is that a fair?
Correct. Yep, you correctly captured it.
Okay, so Janet, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I don't think there's sort of one or two things that can be taken out of the meeting. We are taking sort of a lot of different information out of the meeting. I think Sarah nicely highlighted some of the information in terms of ways that it can help the pharmaceutical industry directly, including having sort of a better sense of some of the different symptoms that patients with CFS and ME are suffering from, because these symptoms could be thought of as sort of novel endpoints in clinical trials. So if you haven't read the report that Sarah was discussing, I would really recommend that you look at that, because I think it is an excellent way as a pharmaceutical company that you can think about what clinical endpoints should be studied in trials to really establish that a drug has a beneficial effect. Because as I've tried to emphasize, the division is very open to really having a pharmaceutical company address aspects of CFS and ME that are important to patients. So if you look at the report and see the different types of symptoms that patients are suffering from, those are clearly things that we would think would be important endpoints in a clinical trial. Does that sort of help answer how the document and how the workshops can be used?
Yeah, no, it does. I'm more on the policy side, and so we're taking a look at how the FDA is implementing the benefit risk framework across review divisions, I guess. And so specifically, I was looking at Appendix 3 of the report. I see where you started to kind of fill out where you were hearing some of the different symptoms and things like that. I was just not necessarily just endpoints, but also how you're going to take the findings and kind of and put it into action with the reviewers themselves.
Hi, Scott. This is Teresa Mullen. Of course, we're in a little bit of a receptive, we're on the receiving end of applications, and so what we receive there is the clinical context that we've tried to reflect based on what we've heard. But then it depends, of course, on the performance of a drug that will be submitted in an application by a company. So, as Jan is saying, this is hopefully helpful in companies thinking about maybe patient-reported outcome measures that they might want to try to pursue and as part of what they look at in terms of effectiveness. But that's to give them an idea of how we would be using this information based just on that one meeting. We think that the meeting is extremely valuable, and that's just, to us, the beginning of a process that companies like yours might pursue and use that as well, knowing that these are things that we're going to be thinking of in terms of clinical context.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Our next question comes from Tina Tidmore. Your line is open.
Hi, that is good timing. My question follows up on what Scott asked. First off, I want to thank the FDA for having so many people joining in this meeting. I expected 3, and I have the disease, so I'm not going to be able to remember all your names, but I appreciate there being so many people from the FDA involved in this meeting. I want to say it has been said that this disease lacks outcome measures or endpoints. However, besides the symptom severity questionnaires, experts in the disease have discovered, and the medical literature has shown, that there are biological abnormalities in this disease, including immune system dysfunction, cortisol levels, blood pressure, and many others. And some of this goes back for 20 years. But it also includes what was discovered and has now been validated since 2007, and that is the 2-day CPET test and the drop in anaerobic threshold, as Christopher Snell discussed in the second day. Second day of the April meeting. My question is, will the guidance document that you're preparing include listing these biological abnormalities and or symptom severity measures as endpoints or outcome measures that can be used by drug companies for studying this disease? And will it include some that may not have been discussed at the April meeting, some others that are in the medical literature?
This is Janet Maynard. I'll try and answer that. So the purpose of the guidance document will be to sort of reflect how the division feels that sort of efficacy and safety should be demonstrated for drugs for CFS and ME. So while this is still in process and in draft form, I could say probably the guidance document will not go through sort of all the background about CFS and ME and biological abnormalities, but rather will really try and highlight how a sponsor could sort of prove that a drug is effective for CFS and ME. And we do plan to sort of list some of the types of testing that you have referred to that has been used in both clinical practice and research to sort of show if a patient is doing better or worse. So things like exercise testing or different ways of monitoring patient fatigue. So we'll try and touch on some of the issues that you have brought up. I want to establish efficacy, but more to give kind of high-level overview of the important aspects that we would expect them to do in order to establish efficacy and to push drug development forward.
In all of these guidances, what we also tend to do is we try not to rule anything out unless, there's something very specific we know about a particular endpoint not being useful in a particular disease. That we know that you would never use an endpoint that really works for, some kind, a completely unrelated illness necessarily and test it in this disease. But we rather try to give examples of endpoints, measures that we are aware of that have been shown to be helpful, but leave the door open for conversations with investigators about others that they may think could be useful, and to come in and talk to us about them and why they think they might be useful and how they want to show that.
So basically, the guidance document will have some, but not all.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to have a full cataloging of everything that's ever been used and weigh in on it. It'll take us forever to kind of go through the literature to get at that.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. But what we always tell companies is, if you're going to use a particular endpoint or marker in a trial, you need to be able to scientifically justify why this is a good choice. What do we know about that endpoint? How does it relate to the patient population you're studying? And will it really tell you what you want to know? Mm-hmm. This is basic scientific underpinnings.
Does it improve function?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And our next question comes from Courtney Miller. Your line is open.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Robert Miller's wife, and Robert, who's been a patient for more than 25 years, is unable to give these comments today, so he asked me to do it for him. He says, I want to acknowledge and thank those at the FDA who worked to put the drug development workshop together. The meeting was a very important start to fill the gaps in treatment for suffering patients everywhere. But it is only as good as the follow-up going forward and the speed of bringing treatments to patients. I believe pharmaceutical companies need to see a commitment from the FDA to approve safe and effective products, and they need clear clinical endpoints to measure drug benefits, or they won't come to the table, and they haven't. FDA has the power to bring together the expert clinicians to agree on those endpoints, and that's what I'm asking you to do. You're drafting guidance, which I'm glad to hear, and I would ask if you are, or if you will, consult the clinicians who bet seriousness and treatability of this illness. The same 6 clinical experts have participated in studies across the federal agencies, from Dr. Lipkin's XMRV study at NIH to CDC's clinical assessment study and the private Lipkin studies, which have produced astounding results of immune activation and biomarkers just recently disclosed on a CDC patient call. The experts are there. They have vast experience treating and measuring progress and relapse, and I urge you to convene them to come to consensus on endpoints that can be included in your guidance and that can bring ME/CFS into the 21st century with approved medical treatments like MS. We know the FDA can take initiative in creating special processes. They're doing it for Alzheimer's. We're thrilled that you're doing it here. We just ask that you bring in the experts to outline the clinical endpoints that pharmaceutical companies can start off with. Thank you.
Well, Courtney, thank you for sharing those comments. One of the things that we do is we try to get input from a broad variety of sources. We did some of that. I think we heard a great deal of this at the workshop last April, as well as our own experience in the drugs that we've looked at, as well as the medical literature, much of which has been published by, obviously by experts in the field. And usually what we'll do is we'll put together a draft guidance document to talk about some of that, and we'll put it out for public comment and often convene some of those other experts once we have the whole thing pulled together to try and refine it. Because the endpoint for one aspect of a condition may not be the right endpoint for a different aspect of a condition, and different aspects of a condition might be studied depending on the agent that's being investigated. And so what's appropriate to use as an endpoint in a drug class A is not the same as drug class B. So those are all really good comments, and we expect that we'll continue to seek input. So thank you very much.
And our next participant is Lori Kroger. Your line is open.
Hello. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm going to first congratulate Dr. Maynard for her new position, and thank you to the FDA and Dr. Mullins for capturing the severely ill in the patient voice report. I am president and CEO and also a patient of Pandora.org, and we are the largest patient organization. And because of that, I received many phone calls from suicidal patients. In fact, I got a call yesterday from a patient that was wanting to end her life. I listen, I cry, and I try to offer them hope. The most popular reason, or the most for a suicide, is that patients are extremely sick and they feel like they don't have a future because there are no treatments and they're not getting therapy, and they feel like they're rotting in bed. They want access to treatment like Cytovir, Ampligen, rituximab, antivirals, and they would like insurance coverage so they can afford those also. They also, as you had heard from a couple of other commenters, is that they want a second stakeholder meeting with drug companies and experts present. I would like to offer a nugget of hope to these patients when I get a call, and I'm sure you do too. So can you tell me when a second stakeholder meeting for ME/CFS will take place with industry and with experts?
The answer is that we don't have a date to provide you with. I think one of the challenges is figuring out what drug companies would want to invite. That is something to contemplate, and I also think that's something that the patient organizations that's something that could be hosted even without government engagement, is some sort of a workshop or a convening of experts of drug companies with the experts and the patients who you think are important to engage. We do not have a specific plan for such a stakeholder meeting at this point in time, so I can't promise you a date. Okay. I would like to ask, though, I know we do have a list here here on the FDA site for this call, and I know that there are people from industry who are on the call, and I'd like to know from them if you have suggestions for what would be helpful from your standpoint, because obviously you're on the call for a reason, and I won't call out your names, I won't embarrass you to that degree, but I know there are at least 5 of you.
Okay, and that's a great question because I would like to hear from them too. Also, during the April meeting, there was a chart that showed symptoms, testing that showed the symptoms and biomarkers and what drugs could be used off-label and what patients are using off-label. Is that included in your guidance document for measures? Because I think that would be most helpful to drug companies.
Thank you for that suggestion. So I will go back and look at that. We're not currently planning on including that chart in the guidance document, but we do point pharmaceutical companies to go look at the report that was published, because we do think that there is a wealth of important information in that document that really complements what we were planning on including in the guidance document. So we're thinking of these as kind of complementary documents, so they might not sort of have repetition of information that was in the other one, but clearly citing that information as one of the first things I did, actually, because I recognize it.
And that is a great document, and if any of the drug people that are listening from drug companies would like that, Pandora.org.net has that document. We would be very happy to provide you with that to help you in your development of medications for us. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. They're very helpful.
And our next question comes from Dr. Faith Newton. Your line is open.
Yes, good afternoon. I am an educational researcher with Delaware State University, and I'm also a parent of a 17-year-old who has had CFS since 5th grade. I would like to know, what is the path forward for plans for developing treatments for pediatric ME/CFS?
In terms of the guidance document wasn't planning on sort of specifically talking about pediatrics, but the guidance document does say that we are sort of encouraging development for all different subsets, whether that be certain symptoms of CFS and ME or specific age groups that could be targeted. So we're really trying to make this guidance as encouraging as possible in terms of studying the broad range of patients who are affected by CFS and ME.
Yeah, this is Dr. Michelle. Just to add to what Dr. Maynard said, being that CFS is no longer an orphan disease, it now falls under PREA, which is Pediatric Research Equity Act. And as such, if a product were to be approved for chronic fatigue syndrome, the sponsor would be obligated to consider development in pediatrics as well, and would have to have a specific pediatric plan during their development process that was vetted through the agency.
Thank you very much.
And to add to that, that doesn't mean that development for the pediatric aspects of the condition need to wait until after adult development is done. We have many examples of where pediatric development occurs in parallel.
Thank you for the response. I appreciate the time.
And our next question will come from Jennifer Spatilla. Your line is open.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for today's call. I also want to thank Dr. Michelle for her service on the CFSAC, and I hope we can expect the same kind of participation from Dr. Maynard, and we look forward to welcoming you in November. I have a couple questions and a comment. First, I was wondering if any progress has been made in patient-reported outcome or biomarker qualification. I understand that is a separate process that FDA makes available. I'm wondering if anything has happened since the April meeting to advance that. And the second piece is a comment coming from the training I had as a member of the patient representative program at FDA. A number of the representatives from all different diseases really put a challenge forward to FDA at that meeting, asking that you find more and creative ways to integrate patients earlier in the process, far before a drug comes before an advisory committee. And I know that the PFDD initiative is a part of that, but I'm wondering what role our patient community can play in the development of the guidance document even before the draft is published in the spring. I think that incorporating the patient viewpoint earlier will only produce a better document in the end. Thank you.
So I think this was a two-part question. The first part was whether we were aware of any advancements that have been made in regards to patient-reported outcomes. Is that correct?
In PROs or biomarker qualification.
And I am not aware of any new developments after that meeting related to patient-reported outcomes or biomarker qualifications, in relationship to CFS and ME. But that being said, again, the guidance document is sort of being as inviting as possible in terms of those issues and sort of recognizing while there may not be sort of specific patient-reported outcomes or biomarkers that have been qualified at this point for CFS and ME, that we are willing to work with pharmaceutical companies to help with that process because we understand, of course, that that's a difficult process. The second issue you brought up is, that at the meeting it was stressed that we should have more and creative ways to include patients in the drug development process generally and also sort of specifically in terms of writing the guidance document, correct?
Correct.
So I totally agree with you, and I think that the input we've had, even on this call, has been really helpful in my mind, sort of thinking about how we can either change things in the guidance document or change the links that we have on the CFS and ME webpage to make sure that we're being as helpful as possible in the drug development process. So we are very appreciative of your involvement in this call today and all of the input that we've gotten from interested parties regarding this issue. And we'll continue to think if there's other ways, but I would encourage you to sort of also participate when the draft guidance is available to give comments to the public docket.
Yeah, and I want to support Janet in this. We do have a lot of the input that we have got from the workshop itself will go directly into that guidance document, as well as some of the things we hear in these conversations that we have through conference calls. We are restricted. There are rules about, not of our writing, about how we can go about the process of writing guidance documents. And so, for example, if somebody asked us when we would expect it to be published, we're not even supposed to speculate on what that is. It's just kind of one of those rules that the lawyers and government make you follow. So it's very hard for us to directly incorporate patients in the writing of such a document. But we feel like we have a lot we can incorporate from what we've already gathered so far, and we will seek your input once it's published in different ways to make it even better, so that when it's in final form, it's better.
And our next question in queue comes from Donna Pearson. Your line is open.
Hi, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. My question, I actually have two parts to the question. The first part is if you could please explain a little bit better for the patients who are listening what exactly expedited programs mean when you say priority review, fast track, acceleration. Are we talking about 2 years, 10 years, 20 years? And secondly, how can we be sure that you will have experienced and informed people who are serving on advisory panels when you're reviewing drugs? We all watched the Ampligen Advisory Committee meeting, and it appeared to us that a number of those people really did not understand the disease, and therefore it was difficult for them to truly weigh the risk versus the benefit. So how can they be better informed as well?
Okay. Janet, do you want to take one of those?
Sure. So I think the first question was sort of helping to define what exactly is reviewed in the expedited programs for serious conditions, and I did list off some of those, which were the breakthrough therapy designation, accelerated approval, and priority review. So I agree that this terminology is confusing not only to us but to industry, and that is one of the reasons why there is a guidance available for assistance with these topics, because it's sort of confusing how it applies to different stages of the drug development process. So I would encourage you, if you Google the FDA guidance on this issue, it has a really helpful table that sort of goes over what those different programs are and at which stage of the development it would refer to. And I think Randy's saying that she can add that link to the CFS and ME webpage because it's very helpful and it gives a sense for sort of when those different programs would apply and what are the implications of those for drug development. Some of the programs give pharmaceutical companies more access to working with FDA to help them develop that way, and other programs are in terms of how long it takes FDA to review an application, or speeds up when a drug would be approved. So I think it really, in terms of your question, sort of when is there going to be a drug available, I think is what you're getting to for CFS and ME. I can't give you sort of a number in terms of those different programs, but I think if you have a chance to look at that guidance, it's sort of helpful in articulating different ways that programs are available for serious conditions.
And this is Terry Michelle. I'll just comment on the second part of your question, which is the advisory panel members and how do we choose and how do we make sure that we have the best expertise on all of our committees. So the advisory panels are made up of two different groups. The first group is a standing panel, and there are actually 34 different advisory panels at the FDA covering a variety of different areas. Chronic fatigue syndrome drugs go to the rheumatology advisory panel, and there's a standing committee made up of a statistician as well as clinical research experts in the area of rheumatology. So because everything goes to that panel regardless of what the specific disease area within rheumatology is, we make sure that the standing committees have a variety of different experts on them. Some may be experts in gout, some may be experts in lupus and cover a variety of different areas, but all of them have a very high level of expertise in clinical trials and bring something unique to the table. In addition to that, we supplement our committees with experts in chronic fatigue syndrome, if that's what we're talking about, and specifically bring on several members of the panel who have particular expertise in the area that we're discussing on that particular day. And so the purpose of this is to give FDA a wide variety of opinions, and the variety adds richness to the conversation. So that's kind of where the thinking goes, and why not every single person on a panel has the same level of expertise, because these are very complex applications, and as such, you need to bring together a whole lot of different opinions and a whole lot of different expertises to the table to begin to think about things. Dr. Queter, did you have anything to add to that?
I think that's a good summary, Terry. In order to, one of the challenges that we often have is, and it's not unique to this condition, but as a general comment, we often have the challenge of some of the experts who we would like to have sit on the panel. We can't have sit on the panel because they are considered to have conflicts of interest. So, for example, we often find ourselves where we can't get an expert in a particular disease because that expert, him or herself, has been deeply involved in clinical studies of the disease. And because of that, they are considered by the rules governing advisory panels in general to have a conflict of interest. And so they are excluded from the conversation. It's very, very frustrating for us. We work very hard to find good experts. And sometimes where we know of people, we don't even go through the exercise of inviting them because we already know what their conflicts are and that they would never pass. And so it's a continuing challenge, and we are often in a position of reaching out to communities to ask for suggestions for additional experts.
So I would just ask, just to close, that that future panels are given all of the information that you've gathered at the meeting in April, because I remember at least one and maybe more than one government employee commenting that they really didn't truly understand the disease until that day, until they had heard. So I think that was obviously very valuable information that was shared that day, and I would hope that you would share it with future panel members.
That's a great suggestion. That's a really great suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next question comes from Matina Nicholson. Your line is open.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my question is twofold. We clump ME and CFS together, so I was hoping when we're doing the document for guidance that we separate the two diseases out, because if we clump them together, I think we're not going to get the efficacy that we need, so because ME is not CFS. And then second, how does the IOM contract, how would that affect policy? Because there's a lot of patient advocates against it, because we'd rather the experts to come to agreement of a consensus for research case definition. Those are my questions.
Maybe I can address the first part of your question, which was about sort of whether we're lumping or splitting CFS and ME together, and I think that's a really interesting point that was also summarized in the Voice of the Patient summary from the workshop. So currently, FDA has been sort of using the term CFS, ME, and CFS, ME interchangeably when describing these conditions. And at this time, FDA does not endorse any particular disease definition. So we're hoping that drug development will focus on quantitative measures of benefit in a defined patient population. And so we're sort of leaving it up to pharmaceutical companies to define which patient population they would like to study and establish the efficacy of their drug. So we're trying to be sort of as inclusive as possible in terms of nomenclature that we're using and what we're encouraging sponsors to study. So we are trying to emphasize your point, though, that it's very important for pharmaceutical companies to be clear about which patients they are going to be studying their drug for, and also to be making sure that they are excluding patients from the study who have other conditions, which could make it difficult to show efficacy of their drug. Does that answer the first part of your question?
Yeah, it's just concerning because if you plug them together, it's just concerning as a patient to get a drug here fast that will be approved. That's all.
Okay. Right, no, that's a good point. Thank you.
And can you ask the second part of your question again?
My second question is about the IOM contract to come up with a case definition for research and diagnosis of the disease, and they're set to do that. I'm sorry, I'm just not here today, but at the same time, there's a group of patients that are against that, and how is that going to impede on the case definition that should be used for research or the policy?
Just as a general comment, I would say that from our standpoint, anytime a large organization with the status of something like the Institute of Medicine agrees to further study and try and help articulate information about a medical condition, it's a good thing. In general, it's a good thing. So we don't see this whatever the IOM comes out with, we see as hopefully enriching the discussion and providing additional ways for people to think about these conditions and find ways to develop medical products, and equally as importantly, to help find ways to bring the conversation about the importance of these conditions into the clinical medicine communities that one of our previous questioners pointed out don't seem to be having these discussions, and we think that's really important. It's one of the ways that we really will all succeed in getting drugs developed to treat patients, is when you have discourse among medical primary care physicians who aren't necessarily experts, but framing the disease in a way that they can grasp onto it, recognize it, and help encourage companies and people who are in the research community to really fund and develop studies and therapies to treat it. So in general, we see it as a good thing. We do understand that there are people who aren't happy with it. It does appear that it's moving forward, and I think the most important thing from our perspective to do is to try and be a part of those conversations wherever we can, try to ensure that the community is engaged with the IOM in a constructive way, and that in the end, that good will come of this.
Good, thank you. I like that answer. And thank you so much for doing this workshop and including patients.
Okay. And I'd just like to add one thing to that. One of the reasons these discussions in the general medical community that I think the IOM can facilitate are important is, none of the companies on the call took my challenge to speak up, but I know that one of the things companies always worry about is, if I build it, will they come? And in their minds, it's not just will people treat patients with my medicine, but will insurers pay for the medicine? And so definitions that will speak to payers that, yes, this is an important medical condition and you should reimburse for therapies to treat this condition, some of that's the kind of thing that can come out of these kinds of reports that the IOM develops. Terry, do you have any comments about that?
I think that you outlined that beautifully, because one of the concerns that I've heard from pharma companies is that they may have difficulty getting reimbursement for approved products because the definitions are so wishy-washy that insurers may not be willing to pay for products. So I think anything that we can do to facilitate definitions, and importantly, to facilitate widespread uptake of these definitions by the medical community, and a group with the status of the Institute of Medicine putting their shoulder to the wheel on this, I think really does help augment those efforts of the patient community.
I think we have time for maybe one more question.
And our last question will come from Rivka Sullivan. Your line is open.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you for this meeting. I appreciate everybody, including the patients who are here, who I know it can take a great deal of energy and effort to be here, and there will be payback. I just wanted to reiterate what Lori talked about earlier, that we did submit this table of potential meds to repurpose. It was a patient-driven effort, and the table has over 100 meds already in use by patients and their doctors. So these meds could certainly be used for repurposing, and thus these the companies that make these meds would be good companies to invite to any subsequent FDA meetings where Big Pharma is invited. So that table, I think, would be key. It took months of our effort to put that table together, and so I would encourage you to use that. And Lori and I will talk to make sure she has the most updated version of that. Somebody did mention on the FDA side of this call that it would be great if patients could organize such a meeting. And I just wanted to make sure that the FDA understands why something like that would be extraordinarily difficult for the patients. We are very, very, very sick, and many of us are so sick that we're just bedridden and homebound. And so organizing something like that would be extraordinarily difficult. And many of us do not have what, for example, the autism community has, like these warrior moms who are fighting so hard for their kids, or in the AIDS community, activists had a community like the LGBT community to fall back on. In our situation, because of the name Chronic Fatigue Syndrome, many of our families never believed the severity of our illness, and they sort of just think, well, why don't we exercise our way out of it? So we don't have the families behind us to help organize these kinds of conferences, and the patients themselves are very sick. So that's the reality of our situation. Meanwhile, we would love it if the FDA were in a position to organize a meeting where Big Pharma was invited, and I think that table would be a great starting point for inviting those companies with regards to repurposing the meds on that table. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your comments are greatly appreciated. I think we have, I'd like to close our call now, and I can't believe it's been about an hour and a half. I want to thank you all for your participation, and I would like to open it up to see if anyone here at the table or on the phone for FDA has any final comments based on what you've heard from the callers today. Sarah, anything from you?
No, I would only want to reiterate my thanks for your input today and the input that we've gotten all throughout this process.
Okay. Teresa, do you have any comments?
I'll just echo that. I thank you for the input and the suggestions you made today. And we're very gratified at your comments about the report that we put together to capture what was heard last April. Thanks for that as well.
Janet?
Thank you. I really appreciate everyone's kind words today, and I look forward to working together.
And I will just close and thank everyone as well, and assure you that our doors are open. We are open for business, and we are continuing to press forward to try and improve the situation of all of you on this call who yourself suffer from this condition, or if your family members or your patients. So thank you very much for spending this time with us today.
And that does conclude today's conference. Thank you for your participation. You may disconnect your line at this time.